Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marco Shiley, and by the following. And by viewers like you. Thank you.
Starting tomorrow, $9.5 billion will begin going out to millions of Californians. Good evening, I'm Maya Trabulsi, and the checks promised months ago are arriving just as gas prices hit new records. KPBS reporter Jacob Ayer has the details on who gets one and for how much.
Starting Friday, the state will begin sending out the money to help weather the storm of high food, gas, rent, and utility costs. The middle-class tax refund is a one-time payment to provide relief to Californians, but you have to have filed for your 2020 tax return by last October. The payments will range from $400 to $1,050 for couples filing jointly and $200 to $700 for all other individuals. How much someone gets depends on their income and whether they claimed a dependent.
On October 7th, up to 23 million Californians will begin to benefit from the nation's largest state tax refund, some $9.5 billion.
The governor's office says a total of 18 million payments will be distributed. But will these checks significantly add to inflation? San Diego State University professor of economics Hisham Fouad doesn't think so.
People had a nice cushion during COVID. A lot of people did. Higher inflation is starting to eat into that. And so this will help a little bit. And I think as long as you're continuing to see these increase in interest rates by the Federal Reserve, then I'm not that concerned that this one-time thing is going to have a huge impact on inflation.
And some other potential good news. Gas prices might be about to head back down, says AAA's Marie Montgomery.
Originally, Southern California is now experiencing all-time record gas prices, $6.43 a gallon in the San Diego area today. People should be aware that gas prices should be coming down. So if you can put off filling up, that's a good idea.
An estimated 8 million direct deposits will start arriving in bank accounts from October 7th through November 14th. And an estimated 10 million debit cards will be delivered from October 25th through January 15th. The refunds are also available for filers who use an individual taxpayer identification number instead of a social security number. To determine payment eligibility, visit taxrefund.ca.gov. Jacob Ayer, KPBS News.
And we have some breaking news tonight. Yet another San Diego County Jail inmate has died, potentially setting a record. Social justice advocates say this is the 19th in-custody death this year. They held a news conference outside the Sheriff's Department headquarters just a short time ago. And that's where KPBS reporter Kitty Alvarado is standing by right now. Kitty, what can you tell us?
Well, Maya, this is now a homicide investigation, and the inmate died after being assaulted by other inmates at the George Bailey Detention Facility in Otay Mesa. The inmate is being identified as 52-year-old Raymond Vogelman, and the Sheriff's Department says that just after 7 o'clock last night, deputies noticed several people fighting and separated them. They found Vogelman near his bunk with injuries that needed emergency treatment. He was taken to a hospital where he died. This is the latest in a string of deaths for the San Diego County jail system over the past 2 years. Just a short time ago, social justice advocates held an emergency news conference outside the sheriff's headquarters. They say they have a lot of questions.
Where was the intercom and were they working? Where were the video cameras and were they working? All of these things were outlined in the audit that the Sheriff's Department underwent. So we're here to say that this number 19, breaks the records of previous years, and we're waiting with bated breath to the next. We're standing with you. We will fight with you to get answers on what happened and why these safeguards were not in place.
and Vogelman had been in custody on burglary charges since March, and he was sent to the Bailey Detention Center last month. The Sheriff's Department did send us a statement saying there's ongoing efforts to mirror the recommendations from the state audit, and it's steadfast in its commitment to keep people in its custody safe. And we will keep on this story and bring you the very latest. But for now, live in Kearney Mesa, Kitty Alvarado, back to you in the studio.
And thanks for that report, Katie. An audit of the San Diego Police Department found that officers were not using their body cameras properly. Today, the City Council's Public Safety and Livable Neighborhoods Committee heard a presentation on the findings. Auditors say they could not find a record of body camera video for 15 to 40% of officers dispatched. And in many cases, officers did not record the entire incident. The police chief is promising to do better.
About where we are with the process as far as the recommendations. As we sit, these recommendations have been placed into our procedure. That, as we speak right now, is going through the routing process for signatures to include my own signature. I expect that to be done within the next 30 calendar days.
But there was some good news that came out of the audit. 98% of videos were kept as long as required, and videos of officer-involved shootings were released within 10 days. California law says the videos have to be released within 45 days. President Joe Biden is taking his first major step toward decriminalizing marijuana. Today, he announced he'll be pardoning all prior federal offenses of simple marijuana possession, which would affect thousands of Americans. The president is also encouraging governors to take similar steps to pardon state charges. The move fulfills a campaign pledge to erase prior federal possession convictions and begins the process of loosening federal classification of the drug. A setback for dreamers. A federal appeals court ruled that the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, known as Daca, is unlawful. KPBS border reporter Gustavo Solis explains what the decision means.
While the decision is yet another blow to Daca recipients, there is still a chance that a lower court could rule in their favor.
While the Fifth Circuit largely upheld the lower court ruling that did find Daca unlawful, the Fifth Circuit will also allow renewals to continue temporarily and has sent the case back down to the district court to consider the new Biden administration's rule.
The lower court will consider the legality of administrative changes to Daca made by the Biden administration. There are roughly 600,000 Daca recipients in the country, and more than 10,000 of them are in San Diego County. Hansen says that they're tired of being in a constant state of limbo.
Folks are tired. Individuals who have Daca and who we've heard speak out since the decision came down yesterday afternoon have expressed exhaustion, anger, being burnt out of living between court decision and court decision.
San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria says that Wednesday's ruling is yet another example of why immigration needs to be addressed by Congress, not the courts.
As the largest border city in the United States, San Diego sees the failings of our current broken immigration system every single day. Dreamers are just a small portion of that. But at some point, there has to be some level of functionality brought to this dysfunctional system.
The lower court is expected to make a decision by the end of the year. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
And coming up, we take a look into injuries at the border wall and the debate over who should cover medical costs for those who are hurt. Bus travel would be great if they weren't so slow, right? In an effort to brainstorm ideas to make MTS bus trips faster, Circulate San Diego has published suggestions that could make the system better for riders. It's called Fast Bus and lists a dozen ways to get buses to get to where they need to much faster. A recent report found that the average San Diegan spends about 26 minutes to get to work by car, but 52 minutes for the same trip by bus.
About how we can make the region's bus system go faster so it's more convenient and more attractive to riders. None of them by themselves are going to make the trips much faster, but together in aggregate they're going to make a lot of difference.
Among the ideas are bus-only lanes, giving buses priority at signals, eliminating stops, longer hours of operation, and offering different areas to pay for fares. First, it was Amtrak's Pacific Surfliner. Now there will be no coaster service in San Diego County this weekend. The rail line is closed October 8th and 9th for routine maintenance. There's no replacement bus service available, and the coaster will be back up and running on Monday morning, but trains may be delayed up to 15 minutes. Gas prices are already hitting records in California, and soon the rest of the country could start feeling our pain. As Chris Nguyen reports, a drastic cut in global oil output is coming.
Less supply of crude oil equals less supply of gasoline. Less supply of gasoline at current demand levels equals higher prices.
Oil experts are warning the price of gas is about to surge after OPEC Plus oil ministers agreed to cut production by 2 million barrels per day.
We are not endangering the energy markets. We are providing security, stability to the energy markets.
At a price.
Everything has a price. Energy security has a price as well.
The decision is a major loss for the Biden administration, which had launched a full-scale pressure campaign in a last-ditch effort to dissuade Middle Eastern allies from cutting production, according to multiple sources.
What's your reaction to the OPEC Plus decision?
Disappointment, and we're looking at what alternatives we may have.
Now, 5 weeks before a high-stakes midterm election, the Biden administration is frantically sifting through options to keep gas prices down.
We believe we have the tools here at home to work with our allies and to work with Congress to make sure that we address the mistake that OPEC made yesterday, which was the wrong direction. And again, I believe it will have less of an impact in the United States and far more of an impact on lower income countries around the world.
There's a lot of alternatives. We haven't made up our mind yet.
Chris Nguyen, KPBS News.
There's a new king when it comes to crops grown here in San Diego County, but at the same time, KPBS reporter John Carroll says farmers in the county are producing much less of a long-time staple of local agriculture.
Think of what drives San Diego's economy, and tourism probably comes to mind. But agriculture is also a huge part of our economic picture, accounting for $1.75 billion in 2021. Now, for the first time in 12 years, the county has a new number one when it comes to production and sales. You can find it, or them, at any local nursery. Whether it's the new top crop, bedding plants, color and perennials, cacti and succulents, or the old number one, ornamental trees and shrubs, business is brisk at places like Walter Anderson here in Poway. But a perennial staple of San Diego County agriculture plummeted in the last report. Yep. It's avocados.
I've been on her radar.
Here at the monthly meeting of the San Diego County Farm Bureau in Escondido.
I do sales right now of nursery products for First Step greenhouses in Temecula.
Horticulturist Fred Ceballos is feeling good about how business is going.
In the last 2 years during the pandemic, the interest in gardening has just increased so much that people have been buying more and more bedding plants, succulents, landscape plants. And
Ceballos says the seemingly never-ending drought has helped their business too. Drought-tolerant plants are selling well. On the other hand, the drought hurts avocado growers like Enrico Ferro as water gets more expensive. But more than that, Ferro says days of extremely hot weather are disastrous.
In May of 2020, we had some pretty good heat, which would have affected the flowering stage in the early set, which could have affected the production for 2021.
Another avocado farmer here told me that's exactly what happened. So that would seem to be what's behind a drop below $100 million in value for avocados, the first time that's happened since the county began tracking agricultural production in 1996. But Ferro sees a silver lining for his delicious dark green crop.
Prices have risen over the last couple of years. Because the production hasn't been there, and with the higher price, you can still pay the bills.
Overall, crop values fell for the first time since 2018, down more than 3%. Still, agriculture is the fifth biggest industry here, helping to feed millions of people, to make spaces and places more beautiful, and to help keep the county's budget in the green. John Carroll, KPBS News.
West Coast leaders gathered in the Bay Area today to sign a new climate agreement. Governor Newsom was joined by the governors of Washington and Oregon, as well as the British Columbia Premier, to update a partnership established in 2016. The Pacific Coast Collaborative aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least 80% by the year 2050.
Well, we have a warming trend taking over the next few days, and the warmest is going to be Friday into Saturday for us with an offshore breeze. That's a warm wind direction for us. It kind of nullifies some of the Pacific influence and just takes the air from the interior and pushes it right up to the coastline. There will be enough moisture, though, for a stray thunderstorm or two in the interior, as there is an upper-level low-pressure system lurking over northwestern Mexico. We're also going to turn cooler then next week, so there are some changes at play here. And overnight tonight, we're dealing with readings down to around 61 in Escondido, 67 in San Diego. On the cool side, we have Campo and Mount Laguna into the mid-50s. So you can see the moisture tied to that northwestern Mexico upper-level low. It's ultimately performing more like a bit of late-season monsoon on Friday, mainly well to our east. We're going to show you future radar, though. There's a small chance we could see a stray thunderstorm in our eastern counties, a little more likely into Friday night and Saturday. But Friday during the day, most of us dry. 98 in Borrego Springs, El Cajon 87, mid-70s out there in Oceanside and San Diego. But that offshore wind becomes a bit more established into Saturday, and that's, again, a warming wind for us here as we're going to be dealing with readings warming up several degrees above average. I want to step aside, though, because you can see just a hint, a couple of stray thunderstorms not too far from inland San Diego County and off to the east near Imperial. So we'll have to keep an eye on them, slightly more likely into the mountains on Saturday. Coastal forecast, we warm up to 77 on Saturday, 76 on Sunday. A little more humid than the norm for us for this time of the year. Inland areas, you can see we warm up to 84 Saturday, then we begin to hedge back down into the mid to upper 70s on Tuesday. Into the mountains there, we have a stray thunderstorm, perhaps late Saturday, more likely on Sunday, and we cool down pretty nicely. Quick look at the deserts. Hey, we're staying in the double digits. At least we're getting a little deeper into the fall, and stray storms Saturday and into Sunday as well. For KPBS News, I'm meteorologist Jeff Cordish.
The number of migrants hospitalized after falling from the border wall is at a record high, but who's picking up the bill when they leave the hospital? It used to be Customs and Border Protection, but KPBS border reporter Gustavo Solis followed the money and found that is increasingly not the case.
Former President Donald Trump didn't deliver on his 2016 campaign promise to build a new wall covering the entirety of the U.S.-Mexico border. But his administration did succeed in doubling the height of some of the existing portions of the border wall. And though there's little evidence that the higher wall actually slowed illegal border crossings, it has caused a big spike in serious injuries to people who've fallen off the 30-foot wall. UCSD Health received 270 border fall patients last year, 200 more than it did in 2019 when the wall was at a lower height. The hospital is already on pace to get more than 300 this year. Dr. Jay Doucette is head of UCSD's trauma unit. He says they're getting so many patients from Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, that the hospital now has a special section just for them.
We had to open up another ward just to deal with the surge from the border.
Many of these patients require lengthy stays in the ICU and multiple surgeries to repair broken bones. In addition to the increased pain and suffering of the victims, this new reality is putting pressure on hospital resources.
As length of stay goes up and the more surgeries that are required, the more expensive things are as well.
But who's responsible for picking up the bill? Well, that's where things get a little murky. CBP is responsible for the medical expenses if the patient is in their custody when they're discharged from the hospital. And that was usually the case as recently as 2019 and 2020. Data from UCSD shows that CBP paid for roughly 75% of the patients their agents brought into the hospital in 2019 and 80% of patients in 2020. But staff at the trauma unit saw a shift in 2021.
Well, now we notice that they're not sticking around as much.
Doucette is referring to the CBP agents. Beginning in 2021, CBP began keeping far fewer patients in custody. Instead, the agents were increasingly giving them a notice to appear in immigration court and walking away. This change in approach coincided with a new California law that expanded health benefits under the state's taxpayer-funded Medi-Cal program to undocumented immigrants. Doucette says that by releasing patients from custody, CBP is essentially handing their hospital bills over to California, which pays for them with a mix of state and federal funds. CBP's own data backs this up. In the San Diego sector, the federal agency covered the medical expenses of roughly 3,000 patients in the fiscal year 2019-2020. That number dropped to 1,300 in 2020-2021, and only 550 during the first 10 months of the current fiscal year. Meanwhile, the average cost per patient has quadrupled, from $1,500 in fiscal year 2019-2020 to $5,500 in fiscal year 2020-2021. CBP officials would not comment specifically on the reason behind their new approach. Instead, they issued a statement confirming that patients who are not kept in custody receive a notice to appear in immigration court. Meanwhile, the practice is drawing criticism from both sides of the immigration debate. Hans von Spakovsky is a senior fellow at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank. He's an outspoken critic of CBP's so-called catch-and-release policy, where Border Patrol agents apprehend migrants who cross the border illegally and then let them go with little more than a notice to appear in court.
So in essence, they are saying, we're going to release you into the country and we're just not going to worry about you anymore.
Von Spakovsky says that there's a significant risk that migrants will simply not show up to their immigration court hearings and continue to live in the country with no legal status.
It makes sense if you think about it, because if they're in the country illegally, what's the point in going to court where you might be detained and actually deported from the country?
Pedro Rios is an immigrant rights activist with American Friends Service Committee. He says the taller wall was built specifically to injure people and deter others from crossing illegally. The fact that CBP is not paying for many of the patients is a sign that the federal government is not taking responsibility for the consequences of extending the border wall.
In fact, they're leaving the rest of San Diego County, the rest of California, to pay for the injuries that are caused as a result of poorly thought through enforcement plans such as the border wall that is causing these injuries.
Von Spakovsky views this as a much larger trend in which local communities end up paying for the federal government's border policies.
There are numerous studies that have been done on the costs of this kind of illegal immigration. And all of those studies show that the vast majority of these costs are paid by local governments, not the federal government. And healthcare costs are one of the big factors.
He blames this on what he considers the Biden administration's lax enforcement policies. Gustavo Solis, KPBS News.
I'm Amna Nawaz. Tonight on the NewsHour, a former police officer kills dozens of children and adults at a daycare center in northeast Thailand. Coming up at 7 right after Evening Edition on KPBS.
Do you throw away food based on the expiration date on the label? Because it might still be perfectly fine to eat. Best before and best by labels on food are drawing scrutiny for creating more food waste. For decades, manufacturers used these labels to estimate a product's peak freshness. But the expiration date does not necessarily mean that it's unsafe to consume. ReFed, a nonprofit studies food waste, estimates that 7% of U.S. food waste is due to consumer confusion over best before labels, and that amounts to 4 million tons annually.
The fundamental problem is that people are misinterpreting the labels on food, and they're prematurely throwing the food away because of that. And that's leading to quite a bit of food going to waste around the whole country.
Some food companies and major grocers in the U.S. are pushing to standardize the language on date labels, and this includes bipartisan legislation in Congress. The United Nations estimates that 17% of global food production is wasted each year, most of which comes from households. Buying a car, it's one of life's big expenses, and it's growing increasingly tougher to afford one. Soaring interest rates, ongoing auto part shortages, coupled with high demand are leading to higher costs. And if you've been waiting to buy a new or used car until prices come down, well, then you could be waiting a lot longer. Jen Sullivan has a closer look.
Auto part shortages, high demand, and soaring interest rates, all driving up car prices.
That means you can't find what you want, and you're going to pay more for it if you can.
And experts say if you've been waiting to buy a new or used car, don't expect the car market to come down to normal levels anytime soon. Experts say companies and dealers have little incentives to take action to bring down costs.
There aren't many new cars available. Toyota, others have said they just don't have a lot of supply. They're really scarce. and the used cars are incredibly highly priced.
New car prices hit a record in August, up 30% over the last 3 years. And used car prices are still up 48% from August of 2019, according to the latest Consumer Price Index. Experts say automakers are still facing shortages of computer chips and other car parts.
That means that prices go up. That means it's harder to find components. It's hard to get things fixed when you go to a repair shop. So all of it creates this kind of snowball cycle.
Meanwhile, rising interest rates mean some car shoppers are already being forced out of the market. According to Cox Automotive, people with weak credit ratings usually make up 15% of new car purchases. Now they're down to just 5%. And according to Edmunds.com, the average new car loan interest rate reached 5.7% in the third quarter of this year. That's the highest it's been since 2019. If you can't wait for the market to improve and need a car now, here's one tip.
Don't go to a bank and don't get it from the dealer. Go to a credit union. They have lower rates because they don't pay tax.
For today's Consumer Watch, I'm Jen Sullivan.
If you're a dog lover, then this will come as no surprise. The act of giving your dog affection by petting them is actually really good for your brain. And now there's scientific proof behind it, which has been published in the journal PLOS ONE. So researchers placed brain scanners on people and then had them pet a live dog and also a stuffed animal. And so the brain's activity, specifically the frontal cortex, was visibly boosted when the person got to pet the pup. And what that research supports is the use of animal therapy to help people with emotional and nervous system issues like strokes and brain trauma. And you can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org. Thanks for joining us. I'm Maya Trabulsi. Good night.
Major funding for KPBS Evening Edition has been made possible in part by Bill Howe Family of Companies, providing San Diego with plumbing, heating and air, restoration, flood and remodeling services for over 40 years. Call 1-800-BILL-HOWE or visit billhowe.com. And by the Conrad Prebys Foundation, Darlene Marcos Shiley. And by the following: and by viewers like you. Thank you.